Welcome to RAMP's Disability Awareness and Inclusion Training for Election Workers. This training was created by Alice Nichols, the curriculum and training developer at RAMP, who is depicted here as a white woman with short blonde hair, and it will be presented to you by me, Dane Johnson, the systems change advocate at RAMP, who is depicted here as a white man with shoulder-length dark blonde hair. On-ramp disability curriculum and training is a cost-effective solution to provide disability-focused curriculum to schools, Centers for Independent Living, or CILs, organizations, and the community at large. The ramp building, a red brick building with a black awning and windows in front, is shown on this slide. RAMP is a nonprofit, non-residential center for independent living that emulates the independent living philosophy, with a mission to build an inclusive community that encourages individuals with disabilities to reach their full potential. RAMP is the only center for independent living that serves Boone, DeKalb, Stevenson, and Winnebago counties, as well as the only agency providing advocacy and independent living services for persons with disabilities. We provide 5 core services: information and referral, education and advocacy, peer support, independent living skills training, and transition services. More than 51% of our staff and board have a disability. As part of our services, we provide training for organizations with regard to any disability needs they may have. 26% of Americans have a disability. Disability is the largest minority group in the United States and the only one you can join at any time. It is inevitable that during election time, you will interact with disabled people at the voting booth and polling station. Today, we're going to look at some general disability awareness and how to make sure things go smoothly for voters with disabilities. We will touch on communication, etiquette and access, and terminology. We also will provide some tip sheets and a checklist. Communication is key in helping provide access and easing the process for voters. Don't make assumptions about someone's disability status, preferences, or needs. Always ask, and do not ask what their disability is, but rather if they need accommodations. When communicating with someone, be patient, flexible, use plain language, and don't make assumptions. You may need to repeat information more than once or use different wording in order to be understood. Some people may have communication disabilities, or communication can be a barrier as part of their disability. If you're having trouble understanding a person, do not interrupt or try to finish their sentences. Do not pretend to understand if you do not. If you do not understand, you can always ask them to repeat. You could also ask follow-up questions or summarize the conversation at the end for verification. If needed, ask if they can say what they're trying to say in a different way. Body language can be as important as what we say too. Good eye contact, open hands, and leaning towards people puts them at ease. This can be especially helpful when a voter is frustrated or stressed. People will communicate in a variety of ways. Some people may communicate through a computer-generated voice, such as those provided by Augmented and Alternative Communication Devices, or AACs. Or they may use text-to-speech software, such as that available via phone, computer, or tablet. Others may prefer non-technological ways, such as pointing at symbols in a book, or writing on paper or a notepad. Human intermediaries, such as sign language interpreters or aides, may also be used. If this is the case, be respectful and always address the person directly, not the person they are with, like the interpreter or personal aide. Moving now to etiquette and access, let's look at some specifics on how to most effectively interact with people with disabilities. For deaf or hard of hearing people, when a companion or interpreter is present to help with communication, make eye contact with and address your instructions or questions to the voter, not the intermediary or interpreter. Two-way communication can occur by nodding, gesturing, or writing notes. If a voter uses lip reading for communication, make sure your face and mouth remain in clear view of the voter. If you point to something, such as a different area in the room or to some pre-printed information, don't look away or at the item you're discussing while speaking. Note that lip reading does not require you to speak slowly or over-enunciate. In fact, doing this actually makes lip reading more difficult. Simply speak clearly at a normal rate of speech. When speaking to people wearing hearing aids or cochlear implants, always speak at a regular volume, unless they ask you to speak louder. These devices are generally tuned for average volume, so deviating from this could hurt more than it helps. Finally, do not slap a table or throw something at a person to get their attention. For people who are blind or have low vision, always identify yourself. A simple, "Hi, I'm Mary, and I'm a poll worker," assures the voter that they're working with the right person. Always provide specific directions to locations. Instead of "the accessible ballot marking device is at the back of the room," you might say, "We have an accessible ballot marking device about 20 feet to your right in the back of the room." If asked to guide a blind person, offer your arm, elbow, or shoulder. When moving, describe what is on the path ahead. For example, you might say, "We are moving through a doorway and taking a right down a hallway." You should also always let the person know when you are leaving. For example, you could say, "I'm going to return to the front area now, unless you would like me to stay." Feel free to offer guiding assistance to blind voters, but always accept their decision to move throughout the voting area without assistance. Service animals have public access rights by law. The only official service animals are dogs and miniature horses. Service dogs may be any size or breed and do not have to wear a vest. Service dogs may provide service to the blind, might be used as a mobility aid, or could perform medical alerts. When talking to somebody with a service animal, you may ask only two questions. Is this a service animal required because of a disability? And what tasks does this service animal perform? You may not ask what the person's disability is, nor may you ask to prove that the dog can do the tasks. Also, do not ever talk to or touch a service animal when it is working. This could distract it from being able to perform its duties. Finally, emotional support animals are distinct and do not have public access rights. People with motor disabilities are the best judge of what they can or cannot do. Never make decisions for them about participating in any activity. You should always help keep walkways clear for wheelchair users. As far as greetings, though, a simple wave, smile, thumbs up, nod, or other greeting is perfectly fine. However, you should never shout, condescend, or force enthusiasm. Forget any jokes or other off-color comments that may be received poorly. Always ask a person using a wheelchair if he or she would like help before you help. And always accept no for an answer, and don't hover around them if they don't want your help. Wheelchair users have their own way of completing tasks, and your close presence may be getting in the way of them doing so. Don't hang, push, or lean on a person's wheelchair. Respect the wheelchair as if it were a part of their body. If your conversation is going to last more than a few minutes, consider sitting down with them. Or, if you don't think it will impede in communication, you could always back up so that they don't have to angle their neck in order to make eye contact. In general, you should always be sensitive about physical contact. Some people with disabilities depend on their arms for balance. If someone is about to fall, grabbing their arm could prevent them from catching themselves rather than help. In general, you should always ask before you act if you're able. Finally, avoid patting a person on the head or touching their wheelchair, scooter, or cane. People with disabilities consider their equipment part of their personal space, which should never be violated. For people with intellectual, cognitive, and developmental disabilities, you should always use clear, specific language. Be patient. Allow the person time to tell or show what they want. Condense lengthy directions into shorter, manageable steps, and provide short, concise instructions. You may present verbal information at a relatively slower pace. Allow appropriate pauses for understanding, time for processing, and repetition if necessary. You may also want to reinforce information with visual cues, such as pictures if necessary. Finally, let's take a look at the language and terminology surrounding disability. Two ways to talk about disability are with person-first or identity-first language. Person-first language recognizes the person before the disability. Examples of this might be person with a disability, woman with Down syndrome, or man with autism. Identity-first language, on the other hand, uses the disability as a part of the person's identity, something not separate from them. Identity-first examples are disabled person, deaf woman, or autistic man. Some disabled people or community groups prefer person-first language, while some prefer identity-first language. Both usages are ultimately acceptable and respectful. But if in doubt, you may consider asking the disabled person which they would prefer if you're unable to pick up on context clues. Ableism is the discrimination or social prejudice against people with disabilities. Ableism and ableist language assume that a disability is something wrong that needs to be fixed. We like to think about disability language as a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum are the obvious negative terms surrounding disability, terms like crippled, handicapped, crazy, psycho, and the R word. Then there are the mid-range terms surrounding disability, such as mentally or physically challenged, suffering, wheelchair-bound, high or low functioning, or impaired, which sound more polite, but still manage to imply something wrong. Finally, at the other end of the spectrum are the sugar-coated euphemistic terms, terms like special needs, handicapable, diffability, differently abled, and calling them heroes. All of these are ultimately ableist, even if they may try to seem positive. You should avoid using any terms like these. The ADA and disability community use the words disability and disabled. While a disabled person has the right to refer to themselves however they choose, rights and accommodations afforded to them under the ADA are labeled under the term disabled and disability. When in doubt, best practice is to ask a disabled person how they would like to be referred to. But in general, disabled or disability are perfectly acceptable and avoid a negative connotation. Finally, please avoid the pervasive trap of what is known as inspiration porn in the disability community. This is the infantilization of people with disabilities, celebrating basic, common, everyday tasks as though they are a monumental achievement. Disabled people are not inspiring because of their disabilities or how they maneuver through life with them. Disabled people certainly do things that are inspirational. However, getting dressed, brushing teeth, having a job, having a relationship, and voting are not inspirational simply because a disabled person does them. Disabled adults are not children. Even if they have intellectual or cognitive disabilities, you should treat them with respect and dignity. They are not automatically cute, precious, or special, and do not need to be spoken to in an alternate tone of voice. It's just another way that disabled people are commonly marginalized. Treat them the way that you would treat anybody else. In closing, listen to disabled people about disability-related issues. It's important to recognize that disability activists have had to fight for autonomy in a lot of contexts, from the right to determine their own medical care, to accessing education that fits their interests, to living independently, and, of course, the right and ability to vote. Don't assign your own values to someone's experience of disability. Disabled people's lives are not worse because they have a disability. They are simply different. Boundaries are key. Always seek consent and never be intrusive. Also, don't offer unsolicited advice. However, you should always be ready to take feedback. If someone says they prefer a different term than one you've used, enforces their own boundaries, or tells you that something isn't accessible, don't get defensive. Instead, take the opportunity to learn. The disability community has a saying, nothing about us without us. Thank you so much for working together to provide an inclusive, accessible voting experience.